Hi friends, today we're going to talk about Module 1 of our paper, Political Science, Definition, Nature and Scope of the Discipline. The first part, the definition and meaning of political science, we have already dealt with in the module number 2. It is difficult to give a precise definition to political science because of its varying scope in different situations. According to some of the famous definitions the political scientists or social scientists have given, it deals with 1. Foundations of state and principles of government. It is a study of shaping and sharing of power, and it is authoritative allocation of values for a society. Normally, a layman associates politics with party politics alone. But politics is much, much larger than that. It is a systematic study of state and power. As we've already spoken about, power is not only associated with state and government, but it is associated with various institutions all throughout our society, also the individuals in our lives. So power shapes our public and private lives. So, as you can see, party politics is merely one part of power struggle in our lives. Hence, political science would study a much, much larger scope of politics, of power. Now, the term politics is derived from the Greek word polis, which means city-state. We'll talk about the evolution of political science a little further. Now, the political science deals with both empirical facts and normative issues. It tries to evaluate the existing political institutions, practices, and focuses on how to improve those particular situations. Now, the evolution of political science. The systematic study of politics started with the Greeks in the 4th century BC. Aristotle and Plato did quite important studies which is relevant even today, which contributed to political science. Aristotle started to categorize and systematically study the constitutions and the kind of rules that existed at that point of time, and hence he's called the father of political science. He called politics a master science. For Aristotle, it comprised of not only the institutions of state or government, but also family, property, and other social institutions. We can safely say this was the first phase in the evolution of political science. The second phase, the Middle Ages, however, political science became a branch of religious order of the church. If you remember the rise of modern nation states, we spoke about how political authority was consumed by religious authority at that point of time. The same thing happened with the discipline of political science too. It became intricately connected to religious studies. Although, with the rise of nation state and the role of state expanding, political science also got a separation from religious studies. The third phase, that is the post-industrial revolution phase, the role of state, which was only earlier the maintenance of law and order and providing defense, underwent a considerable change, especially with the emergence of a new economic system which would revolutionize the world, that is capitalism. As capitalism emerged, the role of state also changed considerably. And with that, the scope of political science also changed. Now, the fourth phase would be the phase after the World War II. Up until then, political science was quite normative, quite value oriented, and was only trying to explain what is good for the world and how the world should change. It could not explain what exactly was happening, and world was at a time where it was facing two deadly world wars, and political science, no matter how much it was trying to explain the world, could do nothing to prevent these wars. And people were asking, what is the point? If we cannot give solutions to situations like this, what is the point of a huge master science? It was at this time several political scientists and social scientists started talking about a different approach to the study of political science, a different dimension. And that is when a replacement of the study of ideas by the study of facts, evidence, and behavior came about. Now we're talking about the 50s, 60s. Now currently, we have the amalgamation of both. Today, the study of political science comprises of both the ideas, normative study, and empirical studies. That is the evolution of political science, and we can safely say that the dimensions of political science actually keeps on improving, because the role of state and the power politics between society and individuals keep changing and keep expanding. And with the expansion of media, with the expansion of artificial intelligence, it is safe to say that political science is finding new dimensions every single day. Now, nature of political science. When you add science to the term political, a lot of people have actually, in a lot of universities and a lot of departments of political science, people don't really agree with the term political science at all, because they say science is a confusing term. But we have to say it is just social science. It is not a science like physics or chemistry. It is not physical science, it is not natural science, but it is social science. Hence, the term cannot be abrogated. Now, why do people attack this discipline saying that it is not a science? There are certain factors: that it is lack of precision, human beings are unpredictable, and the scope of experimentation is very limited. And a person who's a researcher cannot have complete objectivity from his or her own biases. And it is difficult to predict the future. Now, all these things, if they were positive, they would characterize a science like physics or chemistry or maths or nanotechnology or biotechnology. But in political science, we can see none of these factors would actually work. Because we are studying human beings and society who behaves in different ways in different situations. There is no way they are predictable 100%. And we cannot experiment with people like in natural science, in a chemistry lab or a physics lab or in a zoology lab. We can't experiment with people like that either. And the person who's studying political science has his or her own biases. They might have their own political opinions, and their studies might be skewed or changed based on their opinions. So, of course, it is not a natural science, but it is a social science. Now, what is the difference between politics and political science? The term politics indicates the current political problems or issues of politics, or issues basically. So basically the power struggle, basically the party struggles, basically the government and the opposition struggles, all those things that can be characterized or called as politics. It is a widespread and universal activity. And political science is a discipline that would be analyzing these power struggles. Hence, these two terms can be very well distinguished, that is politics and political science. So, study of politics is only a part of political science. Now, what is the scope of political science? Scope would mean what all comes under this particular discipline. Broadly, very broadly, political science can be divided into 5 subdisciplines. 1. Political theory. 2. Public administration. 3. Comparative politics. 4. International relations. And 5. Public law. As I said, it is only a broad differentiation. We can actually come up with many more subdisciplines which can be categorized under political science, like gender studies, like media studies. Many of those things can actually come under, can come under political science. Now, we're going to talk about the approaches to study political science. There are mainly 2 kinds of approaches. One is traditional approaches and modern approaches. When we talked about the evolution of political science, we spoke about how things changed after World War II. So, traditional approaches were widely prevalent till the outbreak of World War II. Now, what are the characteristics of traditional approaches? They're largely normative and stresses on the value of politics, and the emphasis is on the study of different political structures. Now, third one, they made very little attempt to relate theory and research. And fourth one, these approaches believe that since facts and values are closely interlinked, studies in political science can never be scientific. Okay? There will be more of a clarity when we talk about the approaches themselves. Now, which are these traditional approaches? Which are normative and idealistic. Essentially, they're talking about what things should be, how ideal state should be, how the government should be, how a good leader would be, and all that. But they're never talking about what actually is, and no proper scientific inquiry into what exactly is happening today. Okay, so first of these approaches would be philosophical approach. Now, this is the oldest approach. We can trace it back to the times of the Greeks of the 4th century. It deals with the problems of the nature and functions of the state, citizenship, rights and duties, and as the name suggests, these are all quite philosophical studies. They're talking about how things should be. It cannot give solutions to how things can change. It does not give ideas to what exactly is happening today, but what things should be, what ought to be. That's why we call them idealistic and we call them normative. They're not based on facts, but based on ideas of philosophers. The second approach is historical approach. Now, history provides us with a chronological order of every political event, and thereby it helps in future estimation of events also. As say, past always repeats, or history always repeats itself. So it is a good tool. We have to know what has happened in the past to understand what is happening currently and what might happen in the future. It is it's probably one of the most important approaches which is used even today. Now, we have to understand that these approaches may not be always exclusively used. all these approaches can be used together. The traditional approaches can be used together, and traditional and modern approaches can also be used together to give a comprehensive view of one particular issue. Now, historical approach is important and relevant almost all the time. Now, the third approach is institutional approach. Now, it is concerned with the study of the formal structures like legislature, executive judiciary, political parties, interest groups, etc. etc. So basically, it is only studying about the institutions. Now, the fourth one is legal approach, and it is concerned with the legal processes, legal bodies, institutions, justice, and independence of judiciary, etc. Now, these are the traditional approaches. The most important factor that we can see in all these four is that there is not much of an empirical factor coming in. Okay, there's not so much of a fact finding, there's not so much of scientific tools being used or techniques being used to research in any of these approaches. The last portion I would like to talk about is the modern approaches, which came in after the 1920s. So basically after one world war, the idea of modern approaches were stressed, and by the 1950s and 60s they became quite prevalent. How are they different from the traditional approaches? Now, the most important modern approaches would be behavioral and post-behavioral approaches, and within them there are plenty of theories and systematic models coming up. Now, these approaches try to draw conclusion from empirical data. Okay, they're not talking about ideas or philosophical ideas, but they are based on empirical data, and they believe in interdisciplinary study. Okay, they wanted to link political science with mathematics, biology, psychology, criminology, and lots of other disciplines, and they believed in linking these disciplines to give a more comprehensive view. Now, they go beyond the political structures and its historical analysis. So, until then, historical analysis was the most important and crucial part of political science. Now, modern approaches would go beyond it. It's not saying historical analysis was irrelevant after modern approaches came. No, historical analysis became only a part of it. It emphasized on scientific methods. Now, this is probably a very important part. It emphasized on scientific methods of study and attempt to draw scientific conclusions. We'll talk about what are these methods, what these methods are, and what these scientific conclusions are in the next presentation.